Hey guys, I'm Tom and I'm here to talk to you about accepting death, specifically in the Vietnam War. So in the Vietnam War, 500,000 American troops were deployed to Vietnam. More than 1.5 million people, including 58,000 Americans, were killed in this war, along with 300,000 Americans injured. Alright, so the Vietnam War all started with the idea of democracy. So you think American government wanted democracy? No, you're wrong. Vietnam, they wanted democracy. They had elections in place, but the government didn't like this. They were afraid that Vietnam would become a communist country, and with the Red Scare and the Communist Scare, the President Dwight D. Eisenhower said, "No, that's not okay. We can't let Vietnamese pick their own government, so we're going to go to war with them." And this turned out to be one of the most gruesome war of all time. A lot of men that went in this war, they were young men. They were the future of America. But shoot, the government didn't care. Government didn't care that the future of America were dying. No, they just wanted to win the war. Government, they weren't affected. The government officials, they weren't affected. They knew the death toll, but they just kept on sending troops in because they wanted to keep the title of police power. They wanted to win this war. The government really showed this by putting in place the draft system. The draft system really showed what their thoughts were. Their thought was send as many guys. I don't care how their heart is. If they want to be in this war, just send as many guys as possible. You can't win a war like that. You can't win a war by the government accepting the death of all these young men. You can't win a war by these young men not having their hearts and their idea and their soul in this war. With the government lying to them, they can't have that in there. Now the Vietnam War, it touches to me on a personal level. My grandpa, he was in the Vietnam War. I didn't know him. He died when I was at a young age, but my grandma said the war really changed him, and it sucks. He became more uptight, more scared. He had vivid flashbacks. Worst of all, he got a drinking problem, because that's how he got through the war, was drinking alcohol and not knowing what was going on. Many veterans that I researched spoke out against the war and said that's how they got through the war. Without the alcohol, they couldn't have done it. And what kind of war is that? How is the government going to put Americans to that? Even if they're not injured, even if they don't die, emotionally they're wrecked. So the government just accepted the death of these young men and said they're fine with it. They also didn't care what Americans thought about this war. There were many protests back in America, mainly in colleges, because those are people being the most affected. That was the age group being sent into the war. The protests, they grew in America. They grew with the celebrities speaking out against the war. Many musicians like the Beatles, Edwin Starr and Bruce Springsteen, they made songs speaking out against the war. Even Martin Luther King himself, in 1967, had a speech against the Vietnam War. And important figures like Martin Luther King and these musicians, they pushed the protests along to many other people, showing that Americans did not want to be in the war. They just they had no heart. They felt that the government lied to them. They used them. They accepted the death of all these young men and just sent troops into Vietnam to win the war. And they weren't American was not happy about that. They weren't happy that the American government lied to them and used their bodies. And that's not a way to go into a war, and this needs to change. The only way to win a war is to have the government's people backing the war, backing their decisions, and having their hearts in the war. The government needs to change this. The government cannot just go to war without the American people really wanting to be there. A war cannot be won without this, and it just hurts America and the people trusting their government.